any person who wants to try to get into sound, get yourself like a small little recorder, a little accessory kit with like a little wind jammer and a little handle, and just take it out and about. It's true that you're not always going to get usable stuff, but
if, for example, a lion roars at you, you maybe don't want to record that. You might want to leave.
I did go to a zoo and did that once, but I
Okay.
wasn't allowed in. Obviously,
Yeah.
I didn't go in any of the enclosures. But yeah, I went and recorded a few, and I got some really crazy reactions from some of the animals. All the meerkats were really scared, so they all went and hid in their little burrows. One of the tigers was asleep, but when he saw it, he was like looking up and not really. They weren't making any noise, which was a shame. But
Here's my silent recording of a tiger.
yeah. But I got a good one of a flamingo or a big bird like that. Initially, it wasn't that good because it screamed its head off when it first saw it. So then I went back again with reduced the gain, and then it was all right.
Welcome to Filmmaking Framed, your video podcast uncovering the realities of filmmaking. I'm your host, Daniel Hughes.
And I'm your host, Tom Dexter. With us today is sound designer and editor Adam Douglas Jones, who works across film, TV, and video games. Welcome, Adam.
Yo. Hey. Thanks for having me on here, guys. It's great to be here.
So to start off with, could you explain in your own words what a sound editor and designer does?
Sure. I guess the easiest way to get into it is to split it into 3 different roles within sound editing design. There's dialogue, which is speaking. There's sound effects, which I normally say to someone if they ask on the street or whatever, like lightsabers.
Yeah.
And then Foley, which is kind of human interaction, like mostly footsteps, cloth. I would say, I might be wrong, but I feel like I'm quite confident in the difference between when something goes from Foley to being a sound effect is when someone's like opening and going through a door. So someone walks up to the door, it's Foley, footsteps, and they grab the door handle. Grabbing the door handle is Foley, but then the actual door is a sound effect, open and close. But the human interaction, I think, is what the Foley is. That's kind of the 3 different areas: dialogue, sound effects, Foley, from the editorial side. Other parts of post-production is like the mixing as well. But I'm more of an editor. I have mixed things, but I think I just prefer the editing side of things generally. There is another subset from dialogue that's also ADR, which is more so related to re-recording dialogue that wasn't as well captured on set.
So it could be a plane flying over and ruining the take and that sort of thing.
If it's like a period drama or anything like that set whenever, then, there weren't no 737s back then, were there? So, yeah, they'll need to get actors back in for that. But it's generally that kind of area of re-recording, actors doing what they need to do that wasn't quite good enough on set or location or whatever.
And, could you explain in a bit more detail what sound mixing is?
There's production mixing, but I think you're more referring to the post, like re-recording mixer role. That's, I guess, a kind of like where they bring all of the sonic elements of a production, which includes those 3 areas, but also music. And then they essentially will individually mix each of those, which in what should be done in most cases, the editor, myself, for example, will kind of get it into the ballpark level for the production. And then they'll finesse that in terms of levels, along with other post processes like EQing. So equalizing is sort of boosting and reducing certain frequencies of things to bring out clarity throughout the mix so that everything has its own sort of space. kind of thing. Yeah, so that there's clarity and things aren't too like muddied. Yeah, so they'll have each of those individual elements mixed, and then they'll put all of them together and do like a kind of final mix where they will, I guess, sometimes be a bit more creative. Where it's like, oh, in this scene, if we get rid of all of the sound effects and all the dialogue and all the, Foley and just have music for this moment, it will be heightened XYZ. But yeah, that's kind of the mixer's role. And I guess in that instances like that, it'll be a case of sometimes it'll be a planned thing and sometimes it's not, but it's better to have all of the elements at your disposal on the faders to be like, oh, I do this. It changes the focus of a shot, or it can, bring certain things back. Like if music will do another, like a leitmotif, if there's something like that or that comes back that you want to focus on, you'll bring the music up, etc. But if they will, for example, have this idea from the get-go before you even get to post sound, sometimes it can save time, as long as it's written that way and it's...
So an example might be that in a certain scene, having footsteps loud would tell the story in one way, but having them quiet, or you just have them as kind of background where they blend into the sound of the scene.
Yeah, I guess some characters can be evoked. Part of their character can be really emphasized using something like footsteps. When you mentioned that, I think there's a film that had Joaquin Phoenix in. Was it called You Were Never Really Here? Was it that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Lynn Ramsey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The sound of that guy, his footsteps were quite prominent in that mix. And it did add to his sort of like presence within that, because he did move quite slowly. I think there's some scenes where he's walking around a house and the sound of the feet on the floor really sort of added to that. And I can draw on some own experience, and this is about someone I worked on called Truth Seekers. I was editing the Foley on that, so there's a scene with Nick Frost, and he was walking across somewhere, and then I remember something like we got a recording back, and then it maybe didn't sound quite right, so we asked them to do it again, and it was a much more weightier thing because he's a big dude, so he needs to have that kind of like presence within that show. So yeah, that was definitely a moment where I was sort of able to like listen and be like, this might need to be different because it doesn't quite have the energy that's required for that character. But yeah, these kind of things, they sort of work on a subconscious level. You don't, unless you're, I don't know, maybe in the sound film world, you don't necessarily pick up on it straight away.
There's an element of storytelling though to what you're doing in the sound design.
Yeah.
So you can add a lot to a scene depending on how you put the sound in.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not always meant to be perceived. It's meant to just sort of be like subconsciously sort of connect with people in.
And the footsteps are a good example of that.
Yeah. It's a good point.
My question I have is, obviously it's a creative role, therefore designing that sound. It sounds very much like the mixer has got a lot of control over, because they've got all those elements, like the Foley, the effects, and the dialogue. Yeah. How much creativity is there in doing the Foley, the effects, and the dialogue? Is it, because presumably they do their work and deliver it to the mixer so that they can...
Sure. Yeah, I can draw on a couple other things from that. So I guess on the surface level, effects would be considered to be the most creative. I have worked on shows and films where there's like animals and like vehicles and all that kind of stuff. And more often than not, budgetary reasons or other external reasons, you can't always get the exact sound of that individual animal or that individual vehicle. And sometimes you don't necessarily need to. It's again about like the kind of energy coming from that. There's some element of accuracy. Like one example was like there's a camper van in one of the episodes I worked on for Cold Feet a few years ago, and it's a VW camper, the classic one, the 70s looking one, and that has a very specific engine. But due to time, it wasn't like, oh, let's just go get so and so's VW and just rig that and record that. There wasn't time for that. So it was like do your best with whatever you have at your disposal, libraries, and any other original recordings you may have. So it was a matter of me finding what I thought was in the ballpark that sort of loosely matched what it was about in terms of size of the engine from what I loosely knew, which was very little.
I guess it's a lot of fun in researching that and working
Yeah.
out what those are going to be and bringing it all together and creating that sound.
And it was also a matter of like at the end it was quite a liberating scene, and it was quite like it wasn't like a slow plodding driving away. It was quite a big kind of like at the end of the, I think it was at the end of the, near the end of the show. So it needed to have a bit more of a sprightly energy about it, I guess. I just said sprightly. That was weird.
But you say it's quite exciting because some sound editor at some point designed the sound of a lightsaber, right? And similarly, when they made Jurassic Park, someone decided what the sound of a dinosaur was going to be because there are no dinosaurs, so we don't know. And I think is it a T-Rex? It's someone. It's an elephant, or a combination of an elephant and something else.
There's a bunch of different things.
Yeah, so you're bringing together that this is the sound effects department would be doing this.
Yeah.
So they're being creative in the sense of not only finding out the actual engine sound of an actual vehicle, but also and using those limited resources to work that out.
Yeah.
But also in creating new worlds. So in sci-fi and in fantasy, you might be creating completely new sounds. What did the TARDIS sound like when they first designed that? Or what does this particular alien's footsteps sound like? And
I guess it's in some of those cases there was just a fairly open palette that I guess could be quite daunting to sort of be like, okay, so what's this going to sound like? I guess then that's where you collaborate with the writer and the director to sort of understand like what certain objects or places, what they look like and how they may affect characters within the space to then sort of inform, okay, so you start to then narrow down, okay, if this place is supposed to be like cold and dark, then you sort of move down that route with often winds tend to work to make things sound darker. But yeah, it's it can be really creative, but it's often the case that you don't have the time to really get in with the director that early on. It's normally just, here comes this show, boom. Your supervisor will be like, this is kind of what I want from you. And then they'll guide you in your process. Like I worked on a film towards the end of last year, and it was a lot of animals. And there was some bespoke recordings, and there was some libraries. Like there were like big cats and like lions and stuff. And it's not like, oh, I'm just gonna go record down the street, record this lion kind of thing. And you're like, so you do have to draw on certain existing recordings, but you can like substantiate them with other elements. Like I think one thing for like muscle cars, a lot of people put like roars of animals in there underneath to sort of give it an extra layer of aggression, but it's not like the dominant sound in that sort of mix.
You're layering that up.
Yeah, so that's I guess where like a sound designer or effects editor will kind of sort of partly mix things to create an overall sound. It'll be like 2 or 3, maybe more elements within that sound to make it have the full body to it. It'll to also occupy certain frequency ranges as well, so it doesn't sound too thin, so it has that impact kind of thing. Referencing cars so much, I do have to apologize to my dad about the camper van, because that was when that show aired. He phoned me and he was like, "What was that engine? That was not a camper." And I was like, "I know, I'm sorry."
'Cause your dad's a
But
mechanic.
he's the
Yeah.
only one. Yeah, I should have said that. He is a mechanic, and he's worked with cars all his life. So
Mm.
it's only people like him that will really notice and be like, "What was that?"
On a massive budget project, would they have just gone out and either bought
Yeah.
or recorded that sound?
Yeah, they would have probably got that vehicle if it was a really significant vehicle. I'm sure they do that for video games a lot. They'll get a vehicle rigged up with microphones all over the place, under the exhaust, in the engine, inside and outside, all over the place, and then just drive it around, rag it all over the place, and they'll be like, "Yeah, that was a good day of
It's like,
recording."
Yeah, put it in all together and have it as accurate as they can.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
think that's the thing, isn't it? A lot of people are trying to be accurate, but it
Yeah.
just depends on what the resources are that you have.
Yeah, I suppose so. And I mean, sometimes you will go. I guess it can depend on like the type of production. If you're doing a more artsy film, I guess it's less important. Like I imagine certain if you if it was like a David Lynchy type thing, maybe the exact sound of the car isn't the most important thing. But I guess it depends if it's about the car or not. But yeah, I guess in most instances, people will want to try and get the accuracy, but also have its own space within
Mm.
the soundtrack.
Yeah, I suppose if you're making Herbie, you don't want it to have the sound of an electric engine.
Yeah.
It'd just be like, hang on a second, this takes you totally out.
Yeah.
I suppose as the design element and the creative element is knowing where you can push the boundaries and where you can actually, be creative, and where you have to like go super accurate because it's required for that project.
Yeah, that's something that tends to be discussed beforehand. Sometimes it'll come out of nowhere and it'll be like a last minute thing where it's like, "Oh, can you just do a little bit for that?" And I'm like, "Okay." It's like I wanted that. I could do with that today as well. And it's like, "Okay," and then you just have to just throw some things together and see what sticks. Yeah, it's all case by case. That example I was thinking of then was like when there was a few like motion graphics that came up in something I've worked on, and it was something that was not really talked about too much because they also didn't know whether it was the final graphic for certain sections. So it was like, well, I'm not going to put anything because it might change, and then you find out, oh no, it's not changed, so you can just put this in. I suppose in hindsight, I should have put something there anyway. Like, took my own advice. But yeah, it varies a lot. Like a lot of the work I've done, because I've worked in like it's film and TV. That's sort of similar ballpark. Video games is quite different. And then I also worked for Calm, which was also different. Again, it's all fairly similar.
And people who might not know, Calm's an app.
Yeah, mental wellness app.
What software, if there's a budding sound designer out there who wants to get into it in film and TV, what are the softwares that they might need to start looking at and getting familiar with, and what are the sort of industry standard ones?
Sure. The main thing I work in is Pro Tools. That's Avid's own one, where it's like the sound version of Media Composer. All my work, I guess 99% of my work was in that. There's software that you can have for your sound libraries, which is arguably better than just having it in your Finder window on your Mac, because there's a lot more. It shows you more of the metadata, which is information within the file, not just the file name. Like a lot of technical information like bit rate, sample rate, how long. Well, obviously, how long the file is will be on Finder, but there's lots of other like things like if it's from a larger library or if it's often keywords that aren't just in the title of the file, in like the description. A lot of the time that's really important, like knowing the perspective of a sound, or if there's any describing words. Like if I'm looking for rain or something, you'll want the sound of the material that the rain is on. That will be in like some of the other areas of metadata. So software like SoundMiner, useful to have for that, because you can just type in rain and then you'll read rain 01 and then it'll say rain on concrete 50 foot away or whatever. All that kind of stuff's that's useful software.
One of the things I love about you is that, because I've known you for a few years, is you're always out there recording sounds. In your day-to-day life, you'll be out and about. You might be in a pub and you'll be like, oh, there's a really interesting sound here at the bar. So you'll just have a sound recording device on you. And you're creating basically your own library. Is that so that if these things come up, you can just sub it in and you don't have to find that or pay for that?
That was going to be like one of my pieces of advice for people.
Apologies.
Is to always be like recording your own stuff.
I guess the reason I brought it up is do you then have to put the metadata into those files yourself?
Yeah, that's fine though. It's not too taxing as long as you sort of manage time to do that. So if you'll say, I'll go and get X amount of recordings, roughly half an hour. But, there's a lot of variables that could go in that, like maybe there'll be something else interesting there, or maybe it'll be a bust and they'll be over a flight path that you might not want, or anything like that. But yeah, as long as you can sort of manage that. I've admittedly not always the best at that. Sometimes I'll be like, have to go back in and listen to something to then rename it all. But normally it's like I'll record it, bring it back. If there's anything else going on in my day, do that. But then I'll import it and then type in all the information there. And then because then it's fresh in my memory. Yeah, I think recording your own stuff is always really important, because having bespoke original recordings allow people to have the space to really get into and not be distracted by reoccurring sounds. I find, like, I know there's some films you can be watching and then you'll hear like one of them is a baby crying. There's a certain baby cry that I hear in so many TV shows. I'm like, I've heard that baby before. And I don't think that just because I work in sound that is like, oh, well, I'll notice that, but other people won't. I think lots of people will notice these things, and it is distracting to me.
I think the famous ones, is it the Wilhelm scream?
Yeah, it's in like every Star Wars thing. And I know it's sort of a self-referential joke, but I think
it takes me out of it.
Yeah. Same. It does the same for me. It's that thing. It's tricky because I understand it's like Star Wars. You kind of know what you're going to get. You're going to, one way or another, basically kind of just get A New Hope again in some way. But not always. Some Star Wars stuff is actually really good.
But there's going to be a certain level of cheesiness to it.
Yeah.
And fun and lightheartedness.
You know there's a battle scene coming, and then like if there's fighting with stormtroopers, you kind of partly waiting for which one's going to be the one to do the Wilhelm scream. So yeah, it's kind of.
But that's again part of the creativity behind the sound designer's job, is that they can go like, actually, this will be quite funny to be self-referential and put in that scream more.
Unless the sound effects editing contract for a Star Wars thing would be like, must include one Wilhelm in this production while you work on it. But yeah, I mean, I generally prefer it when there's nothing that I've heard before in terms of sound effects and Foley that comes out of that. Then I feel like I engage with it more. I
imagine it comes across in lots of departments. So locations, it would be the same thing as if every single hospital scene was in the exact same room, or every single church was the same church. You'd eventually, the audience would be like, there wasn't that church in the other show I watched. And it's a similar thing. So you're always trying as much as you can with the limited resources that are out there to have original versions of stuff.
Yeah, that's any person who wants to try to get into sound, get yourself like a small little recorder, a little accessory kit with like a little wind jammer and a little handle, and just take it out and about. It's true that you're not always going to get usable stuff, but
if, for example, a lion roars at you, you maybe don't want to record that. You might want to leave.
Yeah.
You wuss.
Yeah.
Adam's there with his recorder inside the lion's mouth. Go again, lion.
Yeah, one more, please. I did go to a zoo and did that once, but I wasn't allowed in. Obviously, I didn't go in any of the enclosures. But yeah, I went and recorded a few, and I got some really crazy reactions from some of the animals. All the meerkats were really scared. So they all went and hid in their little burrows. One of the tigers was asleep, but when he saw it, he was like looking up and not really. They weren't making any noise, which was a shame. But
Here's my silent recording of a tiger.
yeah. But I got a good one of a flamingo or a big bird like that. Initially, it wasn't that good because it screamed its head off when it first saw it. So then I went back again with a reduced gain, and then it was all right. So yeah, I think that there's a lot to learn from going out and doing that. It's quite crazy that like I was doing something recently just in a pub, and this is not really anything that's going to be informative or educational at all, but it's the difference between when you are listening to everything with your ears and then listening to it with your headphones, and it's just a strange, uncanny feeling that you get from it. But it is quite important because it's sort of understanding like what you're going to be picking up and like where you place it and things like that, to get decent perspectives. And there's also quite a bit of a social skill. You've got to be kind of discreet about it all and stuff. Some people will just, I know if I imagine when people go around with cameras, there's a lot of like people going in and wanting to see what you're filming, and you're like, oh, you just ruined it.
Yeah.
So you kind of got to be a little bit like, just record, but hope people just carry on. Yeah. So get into doing that as soon as you can.
So as a freelancer, you own all those sounds because you've captured them yourself.
They're mine.
Do you sell them to the productions you're on, or you just use them?
I just use them. I mean,
yeah.
There's my library is a mix of stuff that I've recorded and stuff I've acquired from library packs that you may buy, or like is quite a sort of unspoken gentleman's agreement or person's agreement where if you're looking for something, you could just ask communities that are also sound editors, anybody got any of this? And then they'll be like, oh, I got some of this. And then you'd be like, is there anything you're looking for? And they'd be like, oh, I could always do with a bit more of this. And then you can just trade sounds, always helping each other in it. Yeah, I forgot what your question was.
No, I asked if you sell it back, which you,
No, I don't.
You don't.
No, you
is what
don't sell
said.
it. No.
Yeah. And
yeah.
when you're working on a job and you go to just a library where you have to buy the asset, I guess you just get that approved by someone in order to make the purchase.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll just get it anyways, but sometimes it's approved. Yeah. It's a mixed bag. It's often trying your best to not have to, but in some cases it can't be avoided. Like the big cat one, which is fine. But luckily, someone did have some sounds that they helped me out with, because it was like one of my first bigger productions that I'd worked on, and they were like, "Oh yeah, give me a bit of a helping hand." So I was gifted some sounds, which is very nice.
Could you talk a bit about how the departments are structured? So obviously you talked about the 3 different types of sound recorders and the sound mixer or ADR and all these different roles. What's the junior levels and what are their supervisors called, and how are those departments structured?
I guess it can depend on the type of production. If it's a feature film, most often cases there'll be from the top. There's the supervising sound editor who's in charge of the sound editorial and design team, and then you'll have sometimes they'll also double up and be the re-recording mixer. Sometimes it'll be a separate person for that. On most big things, it actually could go either way. Sometimes they split it up, sometimes they don't. But they're the 2 sort of heads of post-production sound: supervising sound editor and re-recording mixer. And underneath the supervising sound editor, I know more about than I do about the mixing. But yeah, you'll have a sound effects team, a dialogue team, and a Foley team.
There's someone in charge of each of those.
Not necessarily.
So they're all reporting back to that supervising sound editor.
Yeah, sometimes there is a bit of that, but sometimes less so. Within some productions there would be sound effects editors, and then there'll also be sound designers, because some people can specialize better in like creating like like a more abstract or fantastical sounds, and some people are better at working with realistic things. Like, for example, one person's good at doing things for like spaceships, and one person's really good with vehicles. So they'll separate that out, and this person will be for that kind of side of it, and one person will be for the other side of it. And then the dialogue team, I don't know too much about how that works, but I think there's either, I guess it can depend on the language, but also
I hadn't thought of that. So there'll be a different dialogue person depending on the language that it's being
if there's like
put into. Yeah.
if it's Shogun, like we were talking about before, there'll be different dialogue teams depending on the language spoken. Unless someone could speak both, I guess. But I guess it's a case of like really knowing a language fluently to be able to hear whether.
And does the supervising sound editor oversee the film in all those languages, or do they just do it in the home language and then they send it off to a post house somewhere in the other territories where they maybe do it in German and French or Japanese?
I don't actually fully know, but I suspect your hunch is correct, because there is foreign versioning that will be sent off to other people to deal with more often than not.
I know one of the, because I worked in feature film finance, so one of the deliverables would be a version of the film with none of the sound on it.
Sure.
So that you can, or a version of the film where all the dialogue's been switched off.
Yeah, like an M&E.
Yeah. So then you can, I'm not using technical terms because I don't
M&E is music and effects.
Yeah. So yeah, they would turn all that off so that they can then just send it to the other territory, and it's easier for them to just then
they have the effects
ADR the Japanese speaker, who will then just layer that in.
Yeah, they'll have the music and effects mixed and sent over, and then they'll dub in there.
And they'll have like a sheet with all the time codes and broken down by like the transcript and all that sort of stuff, and then they make it as easy as you can for someone else to do that.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds about right.
What would you say you specialize in?
At the minute, based on my credits, I've done a bit of both in terms of dialogue and sound effects. I think in an ideal world, I would choose to probably go down effects. Not that there's anything wrong with dialogue. I do enjoy some of that, but I think I enjoy effects more simply. So going forward, if I can pick, I will. But honestly, I'm still just happy to go both ways.
You're enjoying all of it, and what comes up,
it's always learning more. I think my first job at Molinaire a few years ago, I was going down towards effects. I wasn't actually there for a great deal before the pandemic hit. But in that time, I got a good few shows in working on Foley editorial, but then I did do some sound effects as well. So it looked like I was going to go that way. But I don't know. I think it was going that way. And then when I went to Calm, a lot of that work is purely rooted in the sound of the voice. So it was a lot of dialogue editing.
So is that just mainly making sure that people are clear to understand, there's no mumbling, they don't talk over each other, all that sort of stuff?
So yeah, I guess the content I worked on at Calm were known as sleep stories. It's somewhere between an audio book and ASMR, kind of. So it's like very relaxed and slow paced and not super emotive.
It's sort of like you're there and you're on a beach and you're relaxing and the sun is setting.
Yeah, a lot of that is very deep dialogue cleanup. So it's listening over the same line for a lot and to the point where it doesn't sound like words anymore. There's
And presumably you're just trying to get it to the highest quality possible. That's the idea.
The ultimate goal is to get the listener to fall asleep, really. The role I took on there was dominantly in the post side of things, but also I was like a studio sort of calm representative, because they're primarily a remote company, and yeah, a lot of the recording sessions I would sort of serve as like a kind of glue between the recording engineer, the performer, actor, and the director to sort of make sure everybody's on the same page, double check the levels of everything, performance, anything in the script, and sort of be, because some people, like the director, would be calling in remotely, and
But and you presumably your mind is on the end goal of the deliverable at the end.
yeah.
Whereas the acting record, they're kind of focused on getting the performance, or in the case of calm performances, delivering it right.
I'm more often thinking about how it sounds for the sound editor, which is again where I was saying the main bulk of my work was thinking, oh, what makes their job easier if we get this take again because I heard a door close, or we could hear some heavy clicking, that kind of stuff. If you hear a lot of that in the back of the throat, it's often just a case of just asking the actor, can you just have a sip of water or have some apple or something like that, just to get rid of a lot of that. That's, a lot of, that was the trying to preventative measures for when you get to the editorial stage.
Because that's why it's really helpful to understand what a sound editor's doing so that you can anticipate problems. We've spoke about it on other episodes about other departments. It's always helpful if you can anticipate what those problems might be so you can avoid them.
Yeah. It does go a long way to know if something's had another take just for clarity. There's some actors that are more aware of themselves than others, and that's really helpful as well. It sort of goes to show that they're really good super pro at like their job, and
that's what you're paying
for,
I guess.
Yeah,
they're a good actor.
Slight name drop. I did do one of the ones was Sleep Stories they've got. It's called Winnie the Pooh, and Tom Hiddleston did that one, and yeah, he's really great at that kind of stuff, self-aware, and he'll like be like, oh, I'll do that again because of this or this. Oh, I'll eat some apple because I can hear this, and it's like, I don't need to do anything.
So there's a tip for everyone: work with pros if you can. When you're clearing up audio and stuff like that, the better quality the space you're recording in, the space the mic quality that you've got, the less work you have in post production on that file.
Yeah, that whole fix it in post is quite
insulting.
I don't take offense from it, but I'm like, oh no.
I genuinely believe fix it in production is way easier. I mean, maybe it's because I'm not an editor per se, but that's why I'm like, let's get it right on the day because I don't have to edit.
Yeah.
But you do save yourself money because there's so much time that goes into post production. You know, the director that you're paying for working across all those weeks in the edit, they're with the editor, but they're also with the sound designer and the ADR team, and it costs a lot of money to hire these spaces, and especially for a low budget feature or a short film, if you can get it right on the day, you save yourself a lot of time and money in post production.
Yeah, it's tricky with like ADR stuff because the actors gotta somehow try and get back to how they were in the moment on set or on location to really channel where they were then, but then they're doing it in a very cold, empty room with a microphone in front of them, being like, okay, you're this person right now, go. And it's like, it's a lot harder than getting it in a more organic setting where they've rehearsed and they're bouncing off of their actors, etc. So ADR is like a last minute thing. If it's absolutely necessary, they'll do it, kind of thing. Yeah.
Just going back, what is the junior level, entry level role for sound?
In a feature film, it will be essentially an assistant sound editor, really.
But do you have to be a runner before you can get into that role? Or can you be like, oh, I've worked in another industry, or I've just graduated university and I want to get into sound design? You can come straight in as assistant sound editor.
I guess, yeah, runner. Yeah. before that, it
So you-
is
So a lot
generally-
of post houses have runners, and they can spend time with these sound editors
Yeah.
and assistant sound editors, and just kind of pick up on the peripheral stuff while they're making teas, coffees, and helping out with various tasks.
Yeah, there's not really assistant sound editors in post houses to my knowledge. I might be wrong, but normally it's runners and then you go up to being an editor. And because you work with a team of other people, they'll be helping you along the way. So there's not that step of junior or assistant, I don't think, in post houses.
There is an assistant sound editor.
Oh, yeah.
They're freelancers.
Yeah.
They're not in a post house.
Yeah, that's what I understand on like bigger feature films. That's at least what I understand it to be. Because they have the budget more often than not is the main reason. But there will be runners there as well, from what I understand. And yeah, it's just about because feature films tend to have, along with the budget, is having more time to work on these things as well. So it's getting everything to like be original and bespoke and have a lot of care taken with these things. Not to say it's not done in post houses. It is definitely done there, but it's often the case that time and budgets squish.
I'd say it's
down.
really a useful tip for people listening. If you're not sure what you want to do in post, a post house as a runner is a really good place. So if you get a
Yeah.
runner position at Modern Air Post or Lip Sync Post or somewhere in Soho or other, like Manchester or other cities, it's a really good place to kind of learn what all those post production roles are. So that especially if you're interested in post sound, you'll get a sense of what it is, how it fits into a film's post production pipeline.
Yeah.
And then maybe you learn a bit or meet someone who's a freelancer who's come in to use a dubbing suite, say.
Yeah.
And then you can speak to them and then they might help you find your route into the industry.
Yeah, I can't comment on like being a runner because I sort of went straight into editing when I worked at Heckenbacker Molyneux.
Well, I mean, let's talk maybe then about what your route in was. So, I know you're from Wales originally.
North Wales, yeah.
So there's young Adam. When did you know you wanted to work in sound design, and what was your path into that?
Yeah, I guess it goes back to music, interest in music. I played drums since I started secondary school, and did all sorts in like rock bands through secondary school, and then went and did music technology because I wanted to learn more about the production side of it, and found that really interesting. And I was also not entirely sure exactly whether I wanted to do music or if I wanted to do like art. Back again when I did my GCSEs and A level, I picked, the real core stable subjects of art and music. And I was getting good grades in art, but I really enjoyed the music. So I was like, I need a bit more time to figure out. I'll do music tech. So I didn't really like go up in educational level. I went sideways to do BTech. And then I was like, okay, music sounds good. And then I went up to start an undergraduate degree in Liverpool. That was in music / popular music. So it sort of covered music theory, but music in pop culture and music tech and music industry. And I was like, this seems like quite a good sort of spread. And there was also performance as well, which was where my sort of original interest came from. And then I did a music in film module and wrote an essay about Taxi Driver. And that was where I sort of fully realized the real difference that sound and music can have on interacting with a character to really sort of emphasize their psychology. Because if you've seen the film, his sort of mental state deteriorates through the film until it explodes with him, doing bad stuff with
Hmm.
guns. And the sound and
Told that
music
story.
becomes a lot more abrasive because one of the big motifs is done on like a snare drum and some brass, and it gets more like the snare hits become more aggressive and abrasive, and it just sort of starts to deteriorate and sound a lot like less smooth. And it was something through watching it multiple times and paying attention to it, I was like, oh my God, this is really, really interesting. I want to do that. So it was combined with sort of coming to certain realizations about the odds of actually making it in as a rock band, which, is a kid's dream way back then, and secretly still is, because I am still doing that now.
You are still a drummer in a band, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was where I sort of thought, I'm gonna try and switch to do film with a focus on sound. But so that required me to change to go to a different university to do film studies, and then any opportunity I could do sound.
Did you abandon the first degree to go do this other one?
I did 1 year
Yeah.
in uni and then went to John Moore's.
So they basically they had such a good film in music in film module that they lost their student because they were too good at it.
I suppose so. Yeah. Yeah. I've never really thought about it that way before. Yeah. So yeah, that's when I sort of.
So you went
shifted.
to do this other degree and did film studies.
I did finish that degree.
Yeah. So was that a practical course, or was it all theory?
It was split like 60-40, 60% theory and 40% practical. And that's where I sort of would take out any sound recording equipment that I could. But also I wanted to learn more about other roles within that, so then I could start to get an understanding of how sound incorporates into it. Because at that point I didn't know really anything about post-production sound. So it was the theory side of it and how it comes out that I was enjoying. And I was also learning about the directing side and the producing side. I was more, in some cases, the producer, because I had a car and we could fit the gear in my car and drive to where we needed to go. And was often the pragmatic one. There would be people with these like crazy ideas like, oh, well, we'll do this and we'll do this and we'll build a room for this. And I'm like, we're students and we can't do any of this. So it was often sort of trying to rein people in to see what's physically possible with the time and what resources we had and all that kind of stuff. But then, I got through that degree with a dissertation and some final year film, or 2 final year films. There was a final year documentary and a fiction. And I was like, I need to really sort of learn more about post-production sound. And that's when I figured it seems that most of this stuff goes down in towards London. And being up in North Wales, there's not really any industry. There's some in Liverpool, but it seems that most of post-production sound happens in London. So I was like, I don't know anybody there, so I can't just go stay with someone and try doing the runner approach. I'm going to see if there's any higher education. And that's where I found the NFTS sound design course, and was very fortunate to get a place on that. And that's, where I really started to properly learn about post-production sound.
What's the application process for the sound design course at NFTS?
Mine was really bad. It was very last minute.
But so there's a written application, is there? And then you got to demonstrate any work, do you?
Yeah. I think you send them a CD. I think you sent them a CD back then, or a drive, or some kind of thing for them to listen to. I sent them part of my final year fiction film from JMU undergraduate, and then also sent them. There was like a small brief of like abstract sounds and like a sound piece that's like 3 minutes long. I can't even remember what I put for that. But
so did you build all that sound for your short films? That's why you had that as a portfolio to apply to National Tourist School.
Yeah. I remember doing things like I went and got like some balloons and popped them in like an archway. And because I remember one of the films had a gun in it, and I thought, if I do that, I might sort of add to it. And because I wasn't savvy enough to think like, do people have free recordings of gun sounds online? They do. Freesound is your friend. Freesound has loads of like, granted, some of the quality is dicey, but
are there any websites you want to shout out?
Freesound's good for free sounds. Again, it's a bit of a minefield. Some are really good, some aren't so good.
I've used it a lot on when I did zero budget short films and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're useful. I got some of my own, but I got some from there.
Do you put your own sounds on there now? So
I haven't.
Back or
No, I haven't. I should, but I'm not very good in like. Even though I said label the metadata and stuff like that, that's only come from not doing it.
Yeah.
That I'm now doing it. So another website that's good for free sounds. This is more just to sort of check like regions, and it's for birds. It's called Zenocanto. It's like a lot of free recordings of birds, and the website is a map of the world, and you can just zoom into certain parts of the world, and they'll be like, oh yeah, this bird was recorded here. They're only MP3s, so that the quality isn't as good, but they can be usable, layered up with other things and stuff like that. Or even just be like, oh yeah, I know that those birds are here. That was quite useful in some stuff that I've worked on before. Sometimes it's like there are certain tropes within films where it's like, if it's a hot country, cicadas, what do you call them?
Yeah,
cicadas?
the insects.
I don't know. Yeah, just put
cicadas,
them in.
I think.
Yes, I don't know. Yeah, cicadas. I've said it wrong 3 times. Yeah,
they're very distinct sound for the regions where they live.
Yeah.
Naturally, so like China, Greece, which are the ones that I've been to. But yeah.
Anything hot, just put them in, and it sort of is like a sonic identifier that it's hot.
Yeah.
There's a few things like that. So sometimes I like to try and put other sounds in, but it's to mixed results. Sometimes it's too distracting. Sometimes it's unnecessary. Yeah, but sometimes it's okay. It's that thing of, again, like trying things out. But one thing that's also kind of important is to try and be economical with your choice, because then it doesn't clutter it up and give your mixer too much to work with, and also shows your confidence in your choices. I do spend time, sometimes too much time, just listening through libraries, being like, yeah, that's good. That's a good win to use for this bit or whatever, or this scene or anything like that. But yeah, you can't.
My head just for some reason started thinking of like flavors. If you were a chef,
Sure.
So if you had a dish and you're a really confident chef, and you just put 3 distinct flavors that really work together, versus cooking a massive dish and you add like 10 seasonings and loads of random ingredients, and so a point where you can't really tell what any of the ingredients are.
Sonic palette.
Yeah, there you are. It's a sound meal.
I think it's like a pizza as well, because I used to like enjoy having pizza with loads of toppings on, but then you got too many flavors going on. If you just give you one that's got some good cheese and good like pepperoni or whatever, then sometimes less is more.
Great. There you are. So we'll make sound pizzas.
Sound pizzas, yeah.
So one thing I know was huge when I was sort of 17, 18, and probably still is now, is people trying to decide whether it's worth doing a film degree. So looking back now, obviously you did the masters at National Film and Television School, which is an incredible school, so it gave you a massive leg up. Was it worth doing the film studies degree? Is that something that you were glad you did, or would you have maybe applied to NFTS without having done that undergrad?
I don't think I would have made it there. I think even though you have a specific if you have a discipline now, or if you knew what discipline you wanted to get into, it's important to know about the whole and like what it all contributes towards, because you can get sometimes lost in you can't see the wood for the trees sometimes, and get too bogged down in like getting nerdy with sound stuff or whatever. So you do have, I think, going back and having a history lesson on a lot of where filmmaking has come from. Every year we did do like different modules. One was on like European cinema, and then one was on like Eastern cinema, and one was on like British, German, all different continents, and sort of that sort of helps.
And that history feeds now into your sound
Yeah,
work.
I think when there's time, you can really sort of look back to certain films to reference and sort of be like, oh, they did this kind of thing. So if we take a bit of that, like, I don't know, I think one filmmaker that did a lot of really interesting stuff visually was Akira Kurosawa. And everything you watch that he does looks amazing because he does a lot with like weather and the fog in, I forget what the Macbeth film was called, Throne of Blood, I think. The fog in that's really cool. There's a lot of rain that he uses, and a lot of that's really great. But I think, was it like the 40s or 50s back then when they were filming them? The sound technology wasn't as good as it is now, or as good as the camera technology. So if you could make some of that stuff now, with much more sophisticated microphones, you could add so much more. You could make the sound as rich as the visuals. If he could come forward in time and it was this hypothetical situation where he was working with me, I would sort of say, like, how can we weave the sound into these ideas that you have? Like, if it is raining somewhere, you can have so many different sort of energy levels for the rain. It could be, it could sound much more gentle, or it could sound really harsh, depending on the material or how closely mic'd it is, and a lot of this different stuff.
So you did your undergraduate degree, you then went to National Film and Television School. Your first job was then with Hackerbacker and Molyneux.
Yeah.
And then you've sort of you've freelanced from there and taken work where you can, and what opportunities come up and what films come up, that sort of thing.
And went to Calm.
And
then
did
went back
Calm. Yeah.
Both of those jobs that I had ultimately were ended because of the pandemic. I wasn't doing anything wrong. It was just redundancy because of the pandemic, which sucks. But I guess the upside of that is I wouldn't have had the Calm thing if I didn't lose the Hackenbacker thing, and I wouldn't have had the stuff in between, because it was Hackenbacker. When I left that, it was only a couple of weeks before I actually did a video game, my first sort of sound effects for the cinematics of a video game. Worked with someone who went to NFTS a few years before we did, and that was really cool to work on. And then there was only a couple of months before I then got the trial for Calm.
I mean, it's fascinating. We spoke about whether to talk about Calm, being that this is a filmmaking podcast. But
Sure.
One thing that we would kind of pass on is that the sound editing skills can be applied in multiple places.
Totally, yeah.
And that's why it's really useful that you were able to transition into that role, and then subsequently you've come out from that role and you're still working in film and TV, but you can kind of move between. So presumably if another app came up that there was a good job that was say a 6-month job, you would potentially take it, and then you can come back to film and TV. And we always try and iterate in this podcast about, as filmmakers, to have flexibility and take earnings where you can, but keep developing your skills. And
definitely.
And that's part of the freelancer life.
Yeah. One other sort of transferable avenue is the likes of audiobooks and podcasts, that a lot of these skills can be applied to, for sure.
What would you say are the skill sets a budding sound designer needs to have? What their character traits, personality traits, that sort of thing? What would make a good sound designer?
Being observant, and it's kind of like being a fly on the wall, kind of, where you can just sort of listener. It's a silly thing to say, but it's obvious. You need to be a good listener. And that applies to, I think, all levels, not just listening to the sound of a thing, but communicating with people. Because when a sound, post-production sound for a project gets to the final mix, you'll be working with directors and producers that have been through hell, and they're just like, I just want this to be over with. And you're kind of engaging with them a bit like a therapist to a degree, or a counselor. And you're sort of like saying, okay, we're going to make this sound great. Don't you worry. And you're sort of there as a kind of like one final kind of supporter to really help get it over the line. So being able to listen to people on a human level is important.
I absolutely love that, and you're championing the sound,
Yeah.
bit of the film process, because they've gotten all the way through those stages, and then they get to you, and you're like, right, let's do this.
You're gonna have to imagine or assume that like an inception of an idea from that a director gets attached to, in most cases, it's not going to come out exactly as they imagine it. So it's them sort of coming to terms with that through that journey, but then also being able to sort of really add that quality polish of sound and really giving it that kind of elevation that you may need.
In your experience working with directors, we all kind of, when we think about directors, we think that they have a kind of a vision for the story, the characters. They have a vision maybe for what the picture looks like, and the action and that sort of thing. Do most directors that you work with have a picture in their mind of what the sound's going to look like? Or is it something that some people don't think about, and then you have to kind of come in and go, look how we can enhance your project?
In some cases where there's like a certain sound within it that's like, oh yeah, this is significant because of the place we're in, or this is a significant object, so it should have a significant sound. It's not necessarily like scene by scene, like the whole way through as like how the sound journey should go. But yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. People, I think they do think about it and do have certain ideas on it, but it's about sort of being able to manage some of those expectations, because sometimes they're often like unrealistic. Again, but that also can depend on the scale as well.
What would an unrealistic expectation look like?
Well, if it's like a short film, it's a case of, well, there's so many variables. It's hard to really.
Is it more like they
gauge.
want to achieve a certain amount of things that they don't have time or money for? Or is it that it's technically not achievable?
Sometimes maybe it's a bit of both. Sometimes there'll be a sound in their head and they'll say, I want this sound. And you're like, is it like this? And they're like, no. Is it like this? Is it this?
So is you trying to mind read can be a challenge when you're working with director.
Yeah.
If they're not good at communicating exactly what they're after.
Well, they are. It's just there's only so many words you can use in the English language to explain a sound. And then there's so many ways you could try and reach that and say, well, it does tick all those boxes, but like, yeah, but it's not that though, is it? And I'm like, oh, I guess not. Let's keep trying. I worked with someone and they had an idea of like something in a harbor, and it was a certain sound of, it wasn't like the flagpoles on boats. There was some other kind of netted objects, but they were also kind of metallic. I can't remember what the word was for it, but it was some kind of nautical sound, boat-related sound. And I tried a lot of different things, and it wasn't quite there. And they did. There was a lot of collaboration to sort of get there, and just sort of finding it wherever you could find it, and then yeah, it's just a lot of like listening through different sounds that you've recorded or libraries just to sort of reach.
And then you sit there with the director and just play some back that you've come up with, and hope that something lands.
Yeah, and there's some cases where, if they do want to get creative, it is sometimes quite difficult to really, when it gets a bit more abstract, there's room for you to try different things, and sometimes it's just that matter of navigating their expectations with your ideas and then feeding back and trying more and feeding back, and yeah, getting through that quite a bit. And it's something that has been a little bit difficult with the whole remote working, because if you're in the room with them, it's a lot easier to be like, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? But when it's remote, you can't really play it back to them clearly through like Zoom or Source Connect often, because you don't know what they're listening on. They're often not listening to the headphones. It's just going out their computer speakers.
So it's not giving them a realistic sense of what it is actually you've created or achieved, or what it will look like, or sound like, I should say.
Yeah. So they're, I guess that's sort of.
So how do you balance that? Do these directors maybe come to your home, where you, if you have a home studio, and
it was trial and improvement, or
Hmm.
trial and error, either or.
And are they, when they're working with a sound designer, are they designing the sound, but they're also the director's head somewhere else because they're also doing the edit and the picture lock and all this? Well, not picture lock, you'd already done that, but
Well, picture lock. There's never picture lock.
well,
that's one
that.
thing
Yeah,
for
yeah.
a sound person, post sound person. When it's freelance, you are more often, your schedule's a little bit more open. You manage your time as you, however you want. But that is also, it's a difficult thing to navigate. I try to just, because I'm not super far into my career, I try to just be available, not at all hours, but I try to sort of cut it off at a certain point. But it's not going to be like 5 o'clock. Sometimes it'll be a little bit later. Just being a bit more available for them.
You're delivering for your client as a freelancer, so you
Sure.
kind of work to their schedule as best you can.
Yeah. I don't mind it. I did sort of, you can adjust what you're doing and how you're doing it. I mean, there are pros and cons to working full time and working freelance, but it is also quite challenging because it's quite a lot of like peaks and valleys in terms of in terms of
How much work's
how
out
much
there?
work is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to people to manage that freelancing life?
In one way, kind of say yes to pretty much anything. It doesn't. I don't mind too much the scale of things. If something comes along that pays better, naturally I'm going to take it. But I like to try and, just from having all these different experiences, I like to try and do work on any scale and work on any kind of project, but also taking time for yourself to like switch off and do things and live your life outside of work related matters, which is a little bit trickier with freelance because I work from home and my setup is kind of in my living room. So sometimes it's sort of, one perspective on that could be that I don't leave my work, but I would contest that and say that I do, because I can just turn it off in my mind. Usually if I'm not physically at the computer working, it's a standing desk, so I'm stood up working. If I'm sitting down on my sofa, it's like, yeah, I'm not working now. Even though it's right there, I don't see it as much of an issue. But I can see how some people prefer to have a place to go to work, because then it's a much bigger barrier. And
I suppose a lot of people experienced that during the pandemic. A lot of people who worked from
Yeah.
home or were forced to work from home.
yeah, I don't mind it. If you're someone who prefers to be out with people, I guess production sounds probably more your bag than post-production. But if you are like motivated enough to work on your own and set yourself your own deadlines, and don't see people as much, post-production is cool. And if you want to sort of in between the two, I guess working in dialogue and ADR, because you'll be going and working with actors in person in the studios, is an avenue that's sort of in between the two. Sound effects is kind of a bit more, you're out recording and then you're going home and messing with your sounds and all your different plugins and all
It
this
sounds
stuff.
like you can dabble between those. A skill set that you learn, a tool you learn, like you say, Pro Tools, and you can kind of trial and error different things and eventually just take the work that you want to take.
It's good to have that flexibility in these times to be able to turn your hand to different areas.
Great. Well, I mean, we won't take much more of your time up. Thank you so much.
I'm here for as long as you want.
Well, we won't take so much time off for the listeners.
Sure.
I feel like other things to do, but thank you so much for coming in. We'll share in the footnotes how people can contact you, and all these list of tools that people might want to want to dabble in if they're interested in getting into post sound.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think that you can get a free month trial for Pro Tools. I think that's how I started.
Right.
But yeah, there are a lot of others I've not mentioned. I think one for dialogue is Isotope.
Okay.
That's a pretty big one. But there's so many.
Great. Well, if you send us a list and then we can list them out for everyone and they can click on the web links and see what takes their fancy.
Link in description.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Adam.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Cheers.